"Can I have your leftovers, Daddy?" And the millionaire nearly fainted when he heard it. Richard Brooks swallowed hard when he felt a small hand lightly touch his arm as he savored the filet mignon at the most expensive restaurant in New York City. Turning his head, his eyes met a boy with messy blonde hair, worn-out clothes, and a plastic bag in his hands. It was then the boy opened his mouth and spoke the words that would make Richard's world collapse like a house of cards. His trembling but determined voice echoed among the elegant tables of the establishment. "Can I have your leftovers, Daddy?" The 42-year-old businessman nearly choked on the $100 French wine he had been sipping calmly. His sunglasses slid down his nose as he stared at the frail child, no more than 7 years old, who gazed back at him with green eyes identical to his own. "What did you say?" Richard murmured, his voice hoarser than he intended. "My mom always said you're my daddy," the boy replied with devastating simplicity. "She said you come here every day for lunch. I've been waiting for 3 weeks, but I never had the courage to talk to you." The boy's words cut through the air like sharp blades. Richard felt his blood run cold. That face, those features, the resemblance was undeniable. The same square jaw, the same eye shape, even the small scar on the left eyebrow he'd had since childhood. The restaurant manager, a short, stocky man named Frank, rushed to the table, his face red with anger. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Brooks. I'll call security right away to get this kid out of here," he said, already reaching for his phone. "No." Richard raised his hand, stopping Frank mid-motion. "Let him stay." The boy smiled timidly, revealing 2 slightly gapped front teeth. Richard remembered his own childhood, when his mother always complained about the same flaw in his smile. "What's your name?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Ethan Miller Johnson. My mom is Emily. She works at a bakery near our house, but sometimes she can't buy enough food for both of us," the boy explained, swinging the plastic bag. "She said if I came here and asked politely, maybe you'd give me your leftovers." Richard felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. Emily. That name echoed in his mind like a ghost from a past he desperately tried to forget. 8 years ago, he had met Emily Miller at a college graduation party. She was an education student, the daughter of a humble family from upstate New York. Their relationship lasted only 6 months, but they were the most intense 6 months of Richard's life. At the time, he had just taken over his father's company and was under constant pressure to marry someone from a good family. Emily didn't fit that profile. When she turned up pregnant, Richard panicked. He offered her money to take care of the problem and disappear from his life forever. Emily refused with a pride and dignity he would never forget. She said she'd raised the child alone and never wanted to see him again. Cowardly, Richard accepted her decision and moved on as if nothing had happened. "Are you sure I'm your father?" he asked, though the answer was already written on the boy's face. Ethan nodded vigorously, digging into the pocket of his torn pants and pulling out a crumpled, faded photo. "My mom keeps this picture. She said it was taken the day you two met." Richard took the photo with trembling hands. It was an image of him and Emily at the graduation party, hugging and smiling. He remembered that moment perfectly. It was when he knew he was hopelessly in love with her. "Sit here," he said, pointing to the chair beside him. Ethan climbed onto the chair with difficulty, his little legs swinging without touching the floor. Richard signaled for the waiter to approach. "Bring another plate just like mine for the boy," he ordered. "You don't have to, Uncle. I just want the leftovers," Ethan protested, but his stomach growled loudly, betraying his hunger. "I'm not your uncle, and you'll eat a proper meal," Richard said, removing his sunglasses to look Ethan in the eyes. The boy's green eyes widened as he saw his father's face for the first time without the dark lenses. "Wow, we really do look alike," he whispered in awe. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. When the plate arrived, Ethan devoured the food with a hunger that broke Richard's heart. Between bites, the boy talked about his life with a childlike honesty that left the businessman increasingly devastated. "Mommy has worked at Mr. George's bakery since I was a baby. She leaves home at 4 in the morning and only comes back at 7 at night. Sometimes she's so tired she falls asleep in the kitchen chair, Ethan said between mouthfuls of meat. But she always saves a little bit of her food for me. And where do you live? Richard asked, though he dreaded the answer. In Hope Gardens. It's far from here. I took 3 buses to get here today. Mommy doesn't know I came. She'd be mad because I told her I was going to play in the park. Richard knew Hope Gardens. It was one of the poorest neighborhoods in the outskirts of New York City. The trip from there to the city center must have taken over 2 hours. How did you get money for the fare? Ethan lowered his eyes, embarrassed. I collected cans for 2 weeks, sold them to Mr. Pete at the scrapyard. He gave me $10. The revelation struck Richard like lightning. This child had worked hard, gathering trash on the streets just to earn enough money to find him, and all of it just to ask for leftovers. Ethan, tell me something. Does your mother ever talk about me? The boy chewed thoughtfully before answering. Sometimes, when she thinks I'm asleep, she cries looking at that photo. She whispers that you were a good man but didn't want a family. She always says it's not your fault, that you had important things to do. Every word felt like a knife to Richard's chest. Emily had protected his image in front of their son, even after everything he had done. She never said anything bad about me. Never, Ethan shook his head. She just gets sad sometimes, especially when other kids talk about their dads and I don't have anything to say. Margaret Collins, Richard's personal assistant of 15 years, appeared at the restaurant door looking for him. When she spotted the scene, she froze in surprise. Richard motioned for her to come closer. Margaret, this is Ethan, he introduced, his voice thick with emotion. He's my son. Margaret's eyes widened, but she quickly composed herself. She had always been a discreet and efficient woman. Nice to meet you, Ethan, she said with a genuine smile. Margaret, I need you to cancel all my afternoon appointments, Richard instructed. But Mr. Brooks, you have the meeting with the Chinese investors at 3. They flew in specially for this. Reschedule for tomorrow. Today I have something more important to do. Ethan finished eating and wiped his mouth with the fine cloth napkin, trying to mimic the elegant manners he saw Richard use. Thank you for the food, Uncle. I mean, Dad. Now I need to get home before Mommy gets back from work. I'm coming with you, Richard said, rising from his chair. You're really coming to my house. Ethan's eyes shone with excitement. Yes, I am. I need to talk to your mother. The trip to Hope Gardens was a journey through completely different worlds. As they moved away from the city center, the elegant buildings gave way to simple houses, then to wooden shacks, and finally to the precarious constructions of the low-income neighborhood. Richard drove his imported black Lexus through the potholed streets, feeling increasingly out of place. Ethan, in the passenger seat, pointed excitedly at everything he saw. Look there, Daddy. That's the school I go to. Miss Jennifer is my favorite teacher. She always says I'm really smart, the boy said proudly. Do you like school? I love it. I want to learn to read all the books in the world. Mommy said when I can read well, I can help her with the household bills. Richard felt his heart tighten. This 7-year-old boy was already thinking about helping support the family. They finally arrived at Hope Gardens. Ethan pointed to a small brick house with a little wooden gate painted in peeling blue. This is it, he said, hopping out of the car with agility. Richard observed the modest home. There were flower pots in the window and a small vegetable garden in the yard. Despite its simplicity, everything was clean and tidy. Ethan knocked on the door excitedly. Mommy, Mommy, I brought a visitor. The door opened, and Richard felt the air leave his lungs. Emily Miller stood in the doorway, more beautiful than he remembered, but with visible signs of exhaustion on her face. Her brown hair was tied in a simple bun, and she wore her bakery uniform. When she saw Richard, her face paled. Ethan, what have you done? She whispered, pulling her son close. Mommy, he came to visit me. Daddy came to our house, Ethan shouted with joy, oblivious to the tension in the air. Emily looked Richard in the eyes for the first time in 8 years. There was pain, anger, but also deep sadness in her gaze. We need to talk, Richard said simply. Emily hesitated for a moment, then opened the door fully. Come in. The house was even smaller inside than it appeared outside. One living room, a bedroom, and a tiny kitchen, but it was impeccably clean and organized. Photos of Ethan were everywhere, from when he was a baby to the present day. "Ethan, go play in the yard," Emily instructed firmly, "but I want to stay with Daddy." "Go, sweetheart, the adults need to talk." When they were alone, a heavy silence settled between them. Richard discreetly observed Emily. She was thinner, with premature wrinkles around her eyes, but she was still the most beautiful woman he had ever known. "How did you find me?" she asked, crossing her arms. "I didn't. Ethan came to me, at the restaurant where I eat lunch every day." Emily's eyes widened. "He did what?" Richard told her the whole story, from the moment Ethan touched his arm to the trip here. As he spoke, he watched Emily's face grow paler. "My God, he could have gotten lost. Something could have happened," she murmured, covering her face with her hands. "Emily, I'm sorry. For everything. For what I did 8 years ago. For abandoning you both, for being a coward." She lifted her eyes and Richard saw tears glistening in them. "You're sorry?" Her voice trembled with restrained anger. "Do you know what I've been through, Richard? Do you know what it was like raising a boy alone, working 12 hours a day, explaining to him why his father never showed up? I know I can't undo what I did, but I want to help now. I want to be Ethan's father." Emily let out a bitter laugh. "Now you want to? 8 years later? After I've done all the hard work alone? I know I have no right to ask for anything, but Ethan needs a father. And I need him too." "You need him?" Emily stood up, walking to the window. "Where were you when he was born premature and spent 2 weeks in the hospital? Where were you when he had pneumonia at 3 years old and I went 5 days without sleep at the hospital? Where were you when he started asking why he didn't have a father like the other kids?" Each question felt like a punch to Richard's gut. He had no answer for any of them. "You're right, Emily, I wasn't here when you needed me, but I'm here now." "For how long? Until you get tired of playing house? Until your rich friends start making jokes about your son from the slums?" Emily's words hit hard. Richard knew she had every reason to distrust him. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing. At that moment, Ethan appeared in the doorway, holding a colorful crayon drawing. "Look what I made for you, Daddy," he said proudly, showing off his artwork. Richard took the paper and felt the world stop. The drawing showed a tall man in a suit, a woman, and a small child, all holding hands, with a bright yellow sun in the sky, and the word "family" written in crooked letters at the bottom. "It's beautiful, Ethan," Richard said, his voice thick. "Do you really like it? I worked on it all afternoon. I wanted you to keep it." Richard glanced at Emily, who watched the scene with teary eyes. "Ethan, go wash up for dinner," she said softly. When the boy left, Richard carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his jacket's inner pocket. "He draws you every day," Emily whispered. "There's a folder under his bed full of pictures of the two of you together. He made up a father in his head, based on the little I told him." "Why did you never speak badly of me to him?" Emily took a deep breath. "Because he's not to blame for your mistakes. And because part of me always hoped you'd show up one day." Richard stepped closer to her. "I'm here now." "But for how long?" She repeated her earlier question. "Forever, if you'll let me." Emily shook her head. "It doesn't work like that, Richard. You can't just show up and expect everything handed to you on a silver platter. If you really want to be part of Ethan's life, you'll have to earn that right. What do you want from me? Commitment. Real commitment. I don't want your money. I don't want you coming here when it's convenient. I want you to prove you truly want to be Ethan's father." "How?" "Come here every day. Learn his routine, his friends, his life. Get to know who your son really is, not just the image you've built in your head." Richard nodded without hesitation. "All right, I'll do it." "And Richard," Emily looked him in the eye, "the first time you hurt that boy, the first time you give some flimsy excuse for not showing up, you'll never see him again. Understood?" Understood. That night, Richard ate his first meal on a plastic plate, sitting at an old Formica table, listening to Ethan talk about his school friends and favorite cartoons. It was the simplest meal he'd had in years, but also the most meaningful. When he said goodbye, Ethan hugged him tightly. "You'll come back tomorrow, Daddy." "I will." "Promise?" "I promise." Richard drove back to his penthouse in the Upper East Side, his mind racing. Everything in his life had changed in just a few hours. He had a son who had grown up without him, who had learned to collect cans just to earn money to meet his father. In the silent, luxurious apartment, Richard poured himself an expensive whiskey and sat on the balcony, watching the city lights. He took out the drawing from his pocket and studied it once more. In those childish scribbles there was more genuine love than in all his professional achievements combined. The next day, Richard cancelled his work commitments once again and returned to Hope Gardens. Ethan was waiting at the window and ran out to meet him when he saw the car approaching. "Daddy, you came back. I knew you'd come back." Richard knelt to receive his son's hug. In that moment, he knew he could never live without that pure, unconditional affection again. In the following days, Richard established a new routine. Every morning after Emily left for work, he would pick Ethan up to take him to school. In the afternoon, he'd return to get him, and they'd spend a few hours together before Emily came home. Little by little, he got to know his son's world. He discovered Ethan was excellent at math, loved soccer, but had never played on a team because they couldn't afford the fees, and dreamed of seeing the ocean. "You've never seen the ocean?" Richard asked, incredulous. "I've never left New York City," Ethan replied matter-of-factly. "But Aunt Jennifer at school showed us some pictures. It must be really cool, huh?" Richard made a mental note to take Ethan to the beach the following weekend. He also realized the boy had an impressive intelligence. At 7, he could already read perfectly and loved listening to stories. Richard started bringing books to read with him. "This book is about a boy who goes on amazing adventures," Richard said, holding up a copy of Adventures of Thumbelina. "Can you read it to me?" "Of course." And so every afternoon, Richard found himself sitting on Emily's small living room couch, with Ethan leaning against his shoulder, reading story after story. One day, when Richard arrived at school to pick Ethan up, his teacher, Jennifer, asked to speak with him. "Are you Ethan's father?" she asked. "I am." "It's good you're here. That boy talks about you so much. He's changed completely these past few weeks, happier, more confident. Even his grades have improved." Richard's chest swelled with pride. "He's a special kid." "He is. But may I make a suggestion? Ethan has a natural talent for learning. With the right encouragement, he could go very far. Maybe you could consider enrolling him in a better school." Richard thanked her for the suggestion, but knew any changes to Ethan's life would have to be discussed with Emily first. That night, he brought it up. "Ethan's teacher thinks he should attend a better school." Emily, who was washing the dinner dishes, stopped with her hands in the soapy water. "And where are you going with this?" "I can pay for private school for him. A good one." "We've talked about this, Richard. I don't want your money. It's not for you, it's for Ethan. He deserves the best opportunities. You think his school isn't good enough?" "It's not that, Emily. But you know a private school could open doors for him in the future." Emily dried her hands on the dish towel and turned to face him. "Ethan is happy at his school. He has friends. He likes his teacher. Why do you want to change that?" "Because I want what's best for him." "Best according to who? You, the standards of your social class." Richard realized he'd touched a nerve. "That's not it." "It is. You want to shape Ethan in your image, turn him into a mini Richard Brooks. But he's not you, Richard. He's my son too." The argument was interrupted by Ethan, who appeared in the kitchen in his pajamas. "Why are you fighting?" he asked, his voice worried. "We're not fighting, sweetheart. Just talking," Emily said, forcing a smile. "Is it about me?" Richard knelt in front of the boy. "Ethan, do you like your school?" "Yeah, why?" "No reason, just curious." Later, when Ethan was already asleep, Richard and Emily returned to the subject. "Listen, I understand your concerns," Richard said calmly. "You're afraid I want to completely change your lives. It's not fear, it's certainty. You've been here 2 weeks and already want to change his school. What's next?" Want us to move to a fancier neighborhood? Want me to quit working at the bakery? Richard didn't answer immediately because Emily had hit the nail on the head. Those ideas had indeed crossed his mind. Maybe some changes would be good. For whom? For you to feel like you're fulfilling your rich father duties, so you can tell your friends you saved the poor single mom and her son. That's not fair, Emily. Not fair, you know what's not fair. It's not fair for you to show up after 8 years and try to rearrange the life I built on my own. It's not fair for you to think you can buy Ethan's love with expensive gifts and opportunities I could never give him. Richard felt anger rising but held it back. I'm not trying to buy his love. I'm trying to give him what he deserves. He already has everything he deserves. He has love, a home, a family. It might not be perfect by your standards, but it's ours. I'm part of this family now too. Are you? Emily laughed dryly. You come here for a few hours a day, read some stories, take him out for ice cream, and think that makes you a dad? Being a father is so much more than that. Then teach me. Teach me how to be his father. Richard's sincere reply caught Emily off guard. She studied him for a long moment. You really want to know? I do. Being a father means waking up in the middle of the night when he has a fever. It means having patience when he throws a tantrum. It means teaching him to tie his shoes, brush his teeth, and be a good person. It means being there for the hard moments, not just the fun ones. Richard absorbed every word. I want to learn all of that. Are you sure? Because it's not glamorous. It's not just fun. There's a lot of work, a lot of worry, a lot of responsibility. I'm sure. Emily took a deep breath. All right, but we'll do it my way. No rushing, no drastic changes. Ethan needs stability. Agreed. In the following weeks, Richard threw himself into fatherhood. He learned to make the oatmeal Ethan liked for breakfast. He figured out how to handle the boys' occasional tantrums. He attended routine doctor's appointments. One afternoon, Ethan came home from school crying. Richard was at the house waiting for him, as had become their routine. What happened, champ? Jack from my class said I'm a liar, Ethan sobbed. Why? Because I told him my dad has a nice car and picks me up from school. He said I'm making it up, that I don't have a dad. Richard felt his blood boil. He pulled Ethan into his arms. Look at me, Ethan. You do have a dad. I'm your dad, and I love you very much. But why did Jack say that? Because he didn't know. But now he will. Tomorrow, I'll pick you up from school and talk to him. Promise? I promise. The next day, Richard arrived at school early. When Ethan came out of the classroom, he ran straight to him. Daddy, you came! Of course I did. Where's Jack? Ethan pointed to a blonde boy near the gate. Richard walked over and crouched to the boy's level. Hi, Jack. I'm Richard, Ethan's dad. The boy's eyes widened. You're real? I sure am. And Ethan never lied to you. He really does have a dad who loves him very much. Jack looked at Ethan, then Richard, then Ethan again. Sorry, Ethan. I didn't know. It's okay. Ethan smiled generously. When they got home, Ethan was beaming. Now everyone at school knows I have a dad. That night, Emily noticed her son's happiness. Why are you so happy today? Ethan told the whole story, with the dramatic details typical of a 7-year-old. Emily looked at Richard with an expression he couldn't decipher. Thank you, she said softly when Ethan went to brush his teeth. For what? For being here for real, not just for fun and gifts. Richard felt his heart warm at the compliment. Emily, can I ask you something? Go ahead. Why did you never try to sue me? To get child support, paternity recognition? Emily was silent for a moment. Because I didn't want Ethan to grow up thinking his father was only in his life because of a legal obligation. I wanted that. If you ever showed up, it would be by your own choice. And if I had never shown up, then it would have been proof I was right not to force anything. Richard admired this woman's wisdom. She had protected Ethan from a forced relationship, preferring to raise her son alone rather than subject him to a father who didn't want him. As the months passed, Richard became a constant presence in Ethan's life. not just during the fun times, but also the hard ones. When Ethan caught chickenpox, Richard cancelled a business trip to take care of him. When the boy had nightmares for a whole week, Richard slept on the couch to be near him. "Daddy, you're never leaving again, right?" Ethan asked one night, clutching the teddy bear Richard had given him. "Never again, champ. Daddy's here forever." "Even if I do something wrong?" "Even then." "Fathers don't abandon their children, Ethan. I was confused before, but now I know you're the most important thing in my life." Ethan smiled and closed his eyes, at peace. Richard was earning his son's trust, but his relationship with Emily was still complicated. She had become cordial, sometimes even friendly, but still kept a cautious distance. One day, Richard arrived at the house and found Emily sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by papers and wearing a worried expression. "Is something wrong?" "Mr. George is selling the bakery," she said without looking up. "The new owner wants to fire half the staff to cut costs. Do you think you'll be let go?" "Almost certainly. I'm one of the longest serving, so my salary is higher." Richard sat in the chair beside her. "Emily, let me help. I can—" "No," she interrupted. "We've talked about this. But it's different now. You could lose your job. If I do, I'll find another one. And if you don't, right away. Ethan needs to eat. You have bills to pay." Emily finally looked at him. "Richard, please don't make this harder than it already is. I just want to help the mother of my son. Is that all I am to you? The mother of your son?" The question caught Richard off guard. He looked at Emily, her brown hair loose over her shoulders, her worried green eyes, her lips tight with anxiety. "No," he answered honestly. "You're much more than that." Emily held his gaze for a long, meaningful moment. Then Ethan walked into the kitchen, breaking the tension. "Mom, can I watch cartoons?" "Of course, sweetheart, but only till 8. When Ethan left, the conversation had lost its thread. Emily went back to organizing the papers, and Richard didn't know what else to say. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. The following week, Emily lost her job, just as she'd predicted. Richard heard the news when he arrived to pick Ethan up from school and found the boy quieter than usual. "What's wrong, champ?" "Mom was crying this morning. She said she lost her job." Richard felt a pang in his chest. He drove straight to Emily's house instead of taking Ethan out like he usually did. He found Emily organizing drawers with frantic energy, as if staying busy could solve all their problems. "Emily!" She looked up and Richard saw she'd been crying. "I heard what happened at the bakery." "That's life," she said, going back to the drawers. "I'm already looking for another job. Let me help." "Richard, it's not charity. It's Ethan's father helping Ethan's family. We're not your family." The words came out harsher than Emily intended. Richard felt as if he'd been slapped. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean that." "Yes, you did. And maybe you're right. Maybe I'm just a visitor here." Richard turned to leave, but Emily grabbed his arm. "Don't go." "Why? You're not my family anyway." "Because Ethan needs you and because I need you too. It was the first time Emily had admitted needing him for something beyond caring for Ethan. Richard turned to face her. "Need my money?" "No, I need you." The words hung in the air. Richard slowly moved closer. "Emily, I know it's complicated. I know we have history, that I hurt your pride many times, that you must be confused. But these months, having you here, it's like a missing piece fell back into place." Richard raised his hand and gently touched Emily's face. "For me too." They were leaning in when Ethan appeared at the living room door. "Daddy, Mommy, are you fighting again?" They quickly pulled apart. "No, sweetheart," Emily said. "We were just talking." Ethan studied them with a child's intuition. "Are you dating?" "Ethan?" Emily blushed. "But it'd be cool if you dated. Then we'd be a real family." Richard and Emily exchanged glances over the boy's head. "We already are a family, Ethan," Richard said. "In our own way." That night after Ethan fell asleep, Richard and Emily had a long, honest talk. They spoke about the past, their mistakes, the hurts they still carried. "I loved you so much," Emily confessed. "When you rejected me, when you offered money to fix the problem, it felt like you'd ripped my heart out. I was an idiot, a coward. I was scared of what my parents would say, what society would think. And now? Now I know I lost 8 years of my son's life because of fear, and I almost lost you forever." "You didn't lose me," Emily said softly. "I'm here." Richard took her hand. "Can we try again?" Slowly, no rush, thinking of Ethan. Emily squeezed his fingers. "We can try." In the following months, Richard, Emily, and Ethan slowly built a new family dynamic. Richard kept his apartment, but spent most of his free time at Emily's place. He helped her find a new job, not by using connections, but by giving emotional support during interviews and watching Ethan when she needed to search. Emily got a position at a clothing store in the mall, with better hours and pay than the bakery. Richard swelled with pride when she told him she'd earned it on merit. Ethan blossomed with his parents' growing harmony. His grades improved further, and he became a more confident, joyful child. Then one day, Richard received a call that would change everything again. It was his mother, Mrs. Elizabeth Brooks, family matriarch and one of New York City's most powerful socialites. "Richard, we need to talk. Come home now." The commanding tone told Richard trouble was coming. In the Brooks mansion in Greenwich, Mrs. Elizabeth was waiting in the living room, surrounded by a pile of gossip magazines. "Sit down," she ordered. Richard obeyed, knowing resistance would be useless. "What is this story about you having a bastard child in a slum?" "First, he's not a bastard. He's my son. Second, he doesn't live in a slum. He lives in a modest neighborhood. Don't play games with me, Richard. You know exactly what I'm talking about." Mrs. Elizabeth tossed one of the magazines onto the table. On the cover was a blurry photo of Richard leaving Ethan's school with the headline, "Millionaire businessman has secret child in low-income neighborhood." How did they find out? It doesn't matter how. What matters is that now everyone knows. You've become a laughing stock in our social circles. Richard felt anger rising. If my social circles think having a child is something to laugh about, maybe I'm in the wrong circles. Richard, be reasonable. This woman and this child will only bring you trouble. Trouble for the family, trouble for the business. They're not trouble. They're my family. We are your family. You have responsibilities, a name to uphold. Richard stood up. "Mother, I respect you, but I won't give up my son and the woman I love because of what strangers think." "You love her?" Mrs. Elizabeth asked, horrified. "Richard, you can't be this naive. She only wants your money. You don't know Emily. She could have sued me for child support 8 years ago and never did. She could accept my financial help now, but always refuses. She doesn't want my money. Then what does she want? The same thing I do. A family." Mrs. Elizabeth fell silent for a moment, studying her son. "If you continue with this madness, you'll be out of the company and out of the family." Richard looked at his mother, at the house where he'd grown up, at everything that represented his old life. "Then that's how it'll be. Richard, think carefully. You're throwing everything away on a whim." "It's not a whim, Mother. It's love. And for the first time in my life, I'm making the right choice." Richard left his parents' house and drove straight to Hope Gardens. He needed to tell Emily and Ethan about the magazine article before they found out another way. He found the two of them preparing dinner together. Ethan was standing on a chair, helping Emily season the salad. "Daddy!" the boy shouted when he saw him. "Just in time. Mommy's making that chicken you like." Richard forced a smile, but Emily could tell something was wrong. "Did something happen?" "We need to talk. After dinner." During the meal, Richard tried to act normal, but his mind was racing. How had this story ended up in the press? Who had been watching them? After Ethan went to bed, Richard showed the magazine to Emily. She read the article silently, growing paler by the minute. "Businessman hides slum-dwelling son for 8 years," she read the subtitle aloud. "Source close to the family reveals that Richard Brooks maintains secret relationship with humble ex-girlfriend." "Emily, I'm so sorry. I don't know how they found out." "This will affect Ethan," she said, worried. "What if his classmates read it? What if the other parents start treating him differently?" I'll fix this. I'll sue the magazine, make them pull the article from circulation. Richard, you don't understand. It doesn't matter if they pull it. The information is already out there. Now we're the poor family of the rich businessman. Ethan will be a curiosity wherever he goes. Richard saw the despair in Emily's eyes and felt powerless. All his wealth, all his power, and he couldn't protect the people he loved most. Emily, maybe it's best if you two come live with me. In my apartment. You'll be safer there. Safe from what? The press, the people? Richard, that will only make things worse. They'll say the gold digger finally got what she wanted. So what if they say that? What matters is that you're safe. Emily shook her head. It's not just about safety. It's about who we are. If we move into your world, we'll stop being ourselves. Ethan will grow up thinking his worth comes from his father's bank account, not from who he is. Richard realized Emily was right, but he didn't know how to fix the situation. In the days that followed, the small family's life turned upside down. Journalists showed up at Emily's doorstep. Ethan came home from school saying some classmates were asking strange questions about his father. Things got worse when Richard arrived at the office on Monday and found his partners in an emergency meeting. "Richard, we need to talk," said William Patterson, his oldest partner. In the conference room, the 5 partners wore serious expressions. "Richard, this media exposure is hurting our image," William began. "We have conservative clients who don't look kindly on this kind of situation." "What kind of situation?" "Having a child." "You know that's not it." Robert Thompson, another partner, cut in. "It's how everything came out. The papers are painting you as a man who abandons his family, who hides children. You know the real story. We do, but the public doesn't. Public. And our company can't be tied to family scandals." Richard looked at the men he'd worked with for over 15 years. "What are you proposing? That you step away from the company temporarily until things calm down? Are you firing me?" "We're suggesting a paid leave," William softened. "A few months out of the spotlight until this blows over." Richard felt betrayed. These men had been his friends, his partners, and now they were abandoning him at the first sign of trouble. "And if I refuse?" "Then we'll have to consider other options," Robert said coldly. "The company needs to protect itself." Richard looked around the table, seeing only closed, calculating faces. "You know what I think of your proposal." He stood slowly. "You can shove it where the sun don't shine." "Richard, be reasonable." "Reasonable? Reasonable would be you supporting me in a tough time. Reasonable would be understanding a man trying to be a better father." He grabbed his things and headed for the door. "Where are you going?" "Home. To my real family." When Richard arrived at Hope Gardens that afternoon, he found Emily at the gate, talking to an elderly neighbor, Mrs. Rose. "Emily, dear, don't pay attention to the gossip," the neighbor said. "You're a hard-working woman, raised that boy right. That's what matters." "Thank you, Mrs. Rose." When the neighbor left, Richard approached Emily. "How are you holding up?" "Surviving. And you? How did it go at the office?" Richard told her about his partner's suggestion. Emily listened silently, her expression worried. "Richard, you shouldn't have fought with them because of us. It wasn't because of you. It was for me, for knowing who I want to be." Ethan came running from school, as he always did when he saw his father. "Daddy, guess what happened today?" "What?" "Aunt Jennifer said you're famous, that you were in a magazine. Can I see?" Richard and Emily exchanged glances. "Ethan, come here," Emily said, pulling her son close. "Some people are writing things about our family. Not everything they say will be true, okay? Like what? They might say Daddy isn't a good father, or that Mommy isn't a good mother. But you know that's not true, right?" Ethan nodded vigorously. "Of course it's not true. Daddy's the best dad in the world, and you're the best mom." Richard's heart clenched at his son's innocent trust. "Champ, if anyone at school says anything bad about our family, you come talk to me or Mommy, okay?" "Okay, but Daddy, why would people want to say bad things about us?" It was a hard question to answer for a 7-year-old. "Sometimes people say bad things Because they don't know the truth, Richard explained. Or because they're angry or sad or confused. Like when I was mad at Jack and said he was annoying. Exactly. So will they apologize later, like I did with Jack? Richard wished the world were as simple as Ethan imagined. I hope so, champ. That night after Ethan fell asleep, Richard made a decision that would change everything once again. Emily, I want to do something, but I need your permission. What? I want to give an interview, tell our real story, in our own words, our own way. Emily was silent for a long moment. Are you sure? It'll put us all out there, for everyone to see. We're already exposed. At least this way we control the story. What if it makes things worse? It can't get much worse than it already is. Emily nodded slowly. Okay, but on one condition. Ethan can't be in it. No photos of him, no full name mentioned. He didn't choose this spotlight. I completely agree. Richard contacted a journalist he knew, Jessica White, who had written balanced pieces about businessmen before. They scheduled the interview for the following weekend. On Saturday morning, Jessica arrived at the house in Hope Gardens with just a photographer. Richard had specifically asked for a small team to avoid scaring Ethan. This is a very different place from where I usually interview businessmen, Jessica remarked, looking around the simple but cozy living room. That's exactly why we're doing it here, Richard replied. For 2 hours, Richard and Emily told their story. They left nothing out, not Richard's mistake 8 years ago, not Emily's pride, nor how Ethan had brought them back together. Do you plan to get married? Jessica asked. Richard and Emily exchanged glances. We're building our family at our own pace, Emily answered. Marriage is just a piece of paper. What matters is the real commitment to each other and to Ethan. Richard, have you faced professional consequences for acknowledging your paternity? I have, but I've learned some deals aren't worth it if you have to give up your family to keep them. And you, Emily, what's it like dating a millionaire businessman? I'm not dating a millionaire businessman, Emily smiled. I'm dating Richard, the father of my son, the man who learned to make oatmeal because it's Ethan's favorite breakfast. The interview was published the following week, spanning 6 magazine pages. The headline read, "The Businessman Who Chose Love." The piece showed Richard in Emily's kitchen, making coffee. Emily reading a book to Ethan on their small living room couch. The 3 of them in the backyard, Ethan playing while his parents talked. The photos were simple, natural, just an ordinary family in ordinary moments. But there was so much genuine love in every image that it was impossible not to be moved. The reaction was immediate and divided. Some were touched by the story of redemption and love. Others criticized Richard for pretending to be a hero when he'd been a neglectful father. But to Richard, Emily, and Ethan, public opinion mattered less and less. They'd found something no money could buy, a real family built on love, forgiveness, and true commitment. 3 months after the interview, Richard made the most important decision of his professional life. He used his savings to start a small consulting firm, working with small and mid-sized business owners. The office was in a simple commercial building, very different from the mirrored towers where he had worked before. But Richard had never been happier professionally. He could work more flexible hours, be present in Ethan's life, and still use his experience to help others build their businesses. 1 year after the day Ethan had asked for leftovers at the restaurant, Richard organized a special party, not in the luxurious ballroom of a hotel, but in the backyard of their home in Hope Gardens with an improvised grill and cold soda. "Why are we having a party, Daddy?" Ethan asked, helping to hang colorful paper flags. "Because today marks exactly 1 year since you changed my life," Richard explained. "I changed your life. Completely. You taught me that being truly rich has nothing to do with money." Ethan smiled, showing the gap-toothed grin Richard had learned to love. "And you changed my life too, Daddy. Now I have a real father, not just in my drawings." Richard knelt to be at his son's eye level. "Ethan, can I ask you something important?" "Sure. Would you give me permission to ask your mom to marry me?" Ethan's green eyes widened with joy. "Really? You're getting married?" "If she says yes, and if you let me." "Of course I will. Then we'll be a real family for real." We already are a real family, champ. Marriage just makes it official on paper. That evening, during the simple party with neighbors and friends from the neighborhood, Richard stood up to make a toast. I want to thank everyone here today. You welcomed our family with open arms, even when fancier places turned us away. There were laughs and applause. But most of all, I want to thank two people. First, Emily, who raised the most amazing boy in the world all by herself and gave me a second chance I didn't deserve. Emily smiled, her eyes shining. And second, to Ethan, who had the courage to approach a stranger in a restaurant and call him Daddy. You taught me that family isn't defined by DNA or money, but by love and presence. Richard raised his glass of soda. To our family. It may not be perfect, it may not be rich, but it's ours and it's real. Everyone cheered, and Ethan ran to hug his father. Daddy, are you really going to ask Mommy to marry you? Yes, I am. Tomorrow. Can I help pick the ring? Richard laughed. Of course you can. You know your mom better than anyone. The next day, Richard and Ethan went to a simple jewelry store downtown. Richard had learned that Emily disliked extravagance, so he looked for something beautiful but understated. This one, Daddy. Ethan pointed to a white gold ring with a small diamond. It's just like Mommy's eyes when she smiles. Richard smiled at his son's poetic comparison. It's perfect. That afternoon, Richard proposed to Emily in the same place where it had all begun, the restaurant where Ethan had first appeared. But this time they were sitting outside at a simple sidewalk table. Emily Miller, Richard said, holding her hands, will you marry me? And before you answer, know that I'm not just asking you, I'm asking for our whole family, our simple, real life, everything we've built together. Emily looked at the ring, then at Richard, then at Ethan, who was hiding behind a lamppost pretending not to spy. Richard Brooks, she answered, her eyes full of happy tears. I will, but only if you promise me one thing. Anything. Promise you'll never try to change us again. That you'll accept our family exactly as we are with all its imperfections. I promise. You're perfect just the way you are. Ethan ran out from behind the lamppost and threw himself into his parents' arms. Now we're a real family. Champ, Richard said, kissing his son's forehead. We've always been a real family, since the very first day you called me Daddy. 6 months later, Richard, Emily, and Ethan got married in a small, intimate ceremony at the neighborhood church. Ethan was the ring bearer, carrying the rings with the pride and seriousness of an adult. At the reception, held in the church hall with simple decorations and homemade food, Richard gave another speech. 2 years ago, I thought I knew what success was. I had money, power, everything I thought mattered. But I was completely empty inside. He looked at Ethan, dapper in his little suit. Until a brave little boy walked up to me in a restaurant and taught me that true wealth isn't in a bank account. It's in a sincere hug, a good night, Daddy, a drawing made with love. Richard took Emily's hand. And until an extraordinary woman gave me the chance to be the man I should have been all along. Emily smiled, radiant in her simple wedding dress. Today we're making official on paper what we've always been in our hearts. A family. Not a perfect family, not a rich family, but a real family. Built on love, forgiveness, and commitment. Applause echoed through the modest hall, and Ethan ran to hug his parents. Now you'll live with us forever, Daddy. Forever, champ. Forever. That night, in the new home they'd bought together, not a mansion, but a nice house in a middle-class neighborhood where Ethan could keep going to the same school, Richard tucked his son into bed. Daddy, can I tell you a secret? Ethan whispered. Of course. That day at the restaurant, I was really scared to talk to you. Why? Because I thought you'd get mad, or say I wasn't really your son. Richard's heart clenched. What gave you the courage to talk to me anyway? Mom always said you were a good man, and I really needed a daddy. Richard kissed his son's forehead. You know what, Ethan, I really needed a son too, I just didn't know it yet. And now you do? Now I know. You're the best thing that's ever happened to me. Ethan smiled sleepily. Good night, Daddy. Good night, my son. Richard left the room and found Emily in the kitchen, preparing coffee for the next day. What's on your mind? She asked, noticing her husband's thoughtful expression. I was thinking about how one simple request for leftovers changed everything. If Ethan hadn't been brave that day. But he was, and you were brave enough to listen. Richard hugged his wife from behind. Emily, do you think we're happy? Look around, Richard. We have a home full of love, a smart, healthy son, work we enjoy, neighbors who respect us. Of course we're happy. Even without the wealth we had before. Especially without the wealth we had before. Now our happiness is real, not bought. Richard glanced out the kitchen window at the small backyard where Ethan played every day, the bike leaning against the wall, the plants Emily tended with care. You know what amazes me most about all this? What? Ethan came to me asking for leftovers and ended up giving me an entire life. Emily smiled and turned in her husband's arms. And you, who thought you had nothing to offer but money, discovered you had everything he really needed. Which was? A present father, a real father. Richard kissed Emily softly. I love you. I love you too. And I love the family we've built. That night, Richard couldn't fall asleep right away. He lay beside his wife, listening to the sounds of the house, the ticking of the living room clock, the distant noise of cars on the street, Ethan's calm breathing in the next room. They were simple, ordinary sounds he had never noticed in his penthouse apartment. But now each sound represented home, family, belonging. 2 years had passed since that day at the restaurant. Ethan was about to turn 10. Emily had been promoted at the clothing store where she worked, and Richard had expanded his consulting firm. They weren't rich in the traditional sense, but they weren't struggling either. They had enough for a comfortable and dignified life, and most importantly, they had each other. On a sunny Sunday, Richard and Ethan were in the backyard building a treehouse. It was a project they had been working on together for weeks. Daddy, when the treehouse is done, can I sleep in it? Ethan asked, holding a small hammer. If your mom says yes, Richard laughed. But I think she'll be afraid you might fall. I won't fall. You taught me to be careful. Richard stopped hammering and looked at his son. Ethan had grown so much, but he still had those bright green eyes and the gap-toothed smile. Ethan, can I ask you a serious question? Sure. Do you remember what it was like before? When it was just you and Mommy? Ethan thought for a moment. I remember a little. I missed having a dad, but Mommy always gave me lots of love. She worked really hard to take care of me. Were you ever mad at me for not being there? At first I was sad, but not mad. Mommy always said sometimes people make wrong choices, but that doesn't mean they're bad people. The wisdom of the answer struck Richard. And now, do you forgive me for the wrong choices I made? Ethan stopped playing with the hammer and looked seriously at his father. Daddy, you don't have to ask for forgiveness anymore. You've already shown you're a good dad. You show it every day. How so? You remember my birthday, come to school meetings, help me with homework, make pancakes on Saturday mornings. Those things are more important than what happened before I knew you. Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. His 10-year-old son had just given him the greatest lesson in forgiveness he'd ever received. Thank you, Ethan. For what? For giving me the chance to be your dad. Ethan smiled and went back to playing with the hammer. You were always my dad, Daddy. It just took us a while to find each other. That afternoon, when the treehouse was finished, Ethan made sure to show it off to all the neighbors. Emily prepared a special snack, and they had a small picnic in the backyard. This is the most beautiful treehouse I've ever seen, Emily said, admiring the work her husband and son had done together. That's because it was made with love, Ethan explained seriously. Everything made with love turns out more beautiful. Richard and Emily exchanged glances, once again amazed by the boy's sensitivity. When night fell, and Ethan finally went to sleep in his regular bed, Emily hadn't approved the first night in the treehouse. Richard and Emily sat on the porch to talk. What are you thinking about? Emily asked, noticing her husband was quieter than usual. I'm thinking about how much our life has changed, and how it could still change more. How so? Richard took a deep breath. Emily, what if we had another child? The question caught Emily by surprise. They had never seriously talked about having more children. You want another child. I do. I want to experience being a father from the very beginning. Seeing the baby born, watching the first steps, hearing the first words. Emily was silent for a moment. Richard, you know I'm already 33, right? And that we're not as young as we used to be. I know. But I also know we still have so much love to give. And Ethan, how would he react? Why don't you ask him yourself? The next morning during breakfast, Emily casually brought it up. Ethan, how would you feel about having a little brother or sister? Ethan nearly choked on his milk. Really, are you having a baby? Not yet, Richard clarified. We're thinking about it. We want to know how you feel. Ethan grew thoughtful, slowly chewing his toast. It'd be cool to have a brother, he finally said. Then I could teach him everything you've taught me. What if it's a sister? That'd be cool too. I'd protect her from anything bad. Richard and Emily smiled. But one condition, Ethan added. What? The baby has to like pancakes on Saturday mornings too. Everyone laughed at the odd request. 6 months later, Emily found out she was pregnant. The news was met with overflowing joy by the whole family. Ethan, now 10 and a half, took his role as big brother with touching seriousness. He went with Emily to doctor's appointments, helped set up the nursery and read stories to his mother's belly. The baby already knows me, he'd say proudly. When I talk, she kicks. Richard was living one of the happiest periods of his life. This time, he got to experience every stage of the pregnancy, every change in Emily's body, every movement of the baby. When Elizabeth Brooks was born, yes, they named her after Richard's mother, in a gesture of reconciliation, Richard cried like he'd never cried before. She's perfect, he whispered, cradling his newborn daughter. Just like Ethan when he was born, Emily said, exhausted but radiant. Ethan, who had been anxiously waiting in the hospital hallway, was finally allowed to meet his sister. Hi, Elizabeth, he said softly, gently touching the baby's tiny hand. I'm your big brother. I'll take care of you forever. The baby squeezed Ethan's finger, as if she already knew his voice. Richard watched, his heart overflowing with love. His family was complete. In the months that followed, Richard experienced for the first time all the stages of fatherhood he had missed with Ethan, the sleepless nights, diaper changes, careful baths, and first giggles. Ethan proved to be an exemplary big brother, helping with everything from warming bottles to distracting Elizabeth when she cried. You're an amazing brother, Richard said one night, finding Ethan softly singing to Elizabeth in her crib. I learned from the best dad in the world, Ethan replied simply. His son's words moved Richard deeply. He hadn't just become a good father, he'd also taught Ethan how to be a good brother. When Elizabeth turned 1, Richard threw a special party, not just to celebrate her birthday, but to honor their family's journey. 4 years ago, he said in his toast, a brave little boy changed my life by asking for leftovers. Today, we have a beautiful family, a home full of love, and we just watched our daughter take her first steps. Elizabeth, who had learned to walk the week before, sat in Ethan's lap, clapping her tiny hands. Ethan taught me that family isn't about money or social status, it's about being present, loving unconditionally and building something real together. Richard looked at Emily, now holding Elizabeth. Emily taught me about forgiveness, second chances, and how true love can overcome any obstacle. Then he knelt in front of Ethan. And Elizabeth, even though she's still a baby, taught me it's never too late to be the father I should have been from the start. Ethan hugged Richard tightly. Dad, you're the best dad in the world, for me and for Elizabeth. Only because you taught me how to be. That night, after the children had gone to bed, Richard and Emily sat in the living room, listening to the cozy silence of the house. Are you happy? Emily asked. Completely. And you? I never thought I could be this happy. Richard took his wife's hand. Emily, thank you. For what? For giving me the chance to be Ethan's father, for accepting to build a family with me, for giving me Elizabeth, for teaching me there's a kind of wealth money can't buy. Emily smiled. Do you know the moment I realized you had truly changed? Which one? When you chose to come here instead of going to the meeting with the Chinese investors, that day, I knew you had finally understood what your real priorities were. Richard nodded. It was the best deal I ever made in my life. I traded $1 million meeting for an afternoon reading stories with my son. And you don't regret it? Never. That meeting could have given me more money. But that afternoon with Ethan gave me something priceless, my son's love. They sat in silence for a moment, just enjoying the peace of the house. Richard, can I tell you something I never have? Of course. That first day, when Ethan came home saying he'd met you, I was scared. Scared of what? Scared you'd try to take him from me, or that you'd hurt him again, or that you'd try to change our lives completely. And now? Now I know my fears were unfounded. You didn't try to change us. You changed to fit into our life. Richard reflected on his wife's words. You know, Emily, I really have changed a lot. But I think the biggest change was realizing happiness isn't about the places you go or the things you buy. It's about the moments you share with the people you love. Like what moments? Like Ethan calling me Daddy for the first time. Like you saying yes when I proposed. Like Elizabeth taking her first steps. Like right now, talking to you after an ordinary day in an ordinary house with an ordinary family. Emily laughed. Our family is anything but ordinary. Why? Ordinary families don't start with a boy asking a millionaire for leftovers at a restaurant. Richard laughed too. True. But you know what's most amazing? That moment, which could have just been an awkward situation, turned into the most important thing in my life. Ethan was always special. Even as a little boy, he had this way of seeing goodness in people, even when they couldn't see it in themselves. What do you mean? He always believed you were a good man, even when I was too hurt to believe it. When he talked about you, it was always with love, never anger. Richard felt his chest tighten. He gave me a love I didn't deserve, but one you learned to deserve. And that's what matters. In the early hours of the morning, Richard went to check on the children before bed. First Elizabeth, sleeping peacefully in her crib, her angelic face and golden curls spread across the pillow. Then Ethan, asleep hugging the stuffed bear Richard had given him their first year together. On the study desk, there was a new drawing, the whole family now, with Richard, Emily, Ethan and Elizabeth all holding hands under a bright sun. Richard smiled. Even after 4 years, Ethan still drew the family constantly. But now the drawings weren't dreams, they were portraits of reality. The next day was Saturday, the sacred pancake day in the Brooks family. Richard woke up early to prepare the special batter he'd learned to make. Ethan appeared in the kitchen still in his pajamas, rubbing his eyes. Good morning, Daddy. Good morning, champ. Sleep well? Yeah. I dreamed we were in the treehouse, but it was huge and fit the whole family. Richard laughed at his son's imagination. And what did we do in that giant treehouse? The same thing we do here. Talk, laugh, eat pancakes. Then it doesn't need to be giant. Our home is already perfect just the way it is. Ethan nodded, climbing onto a chair to help with the pancakes. Daddy, can I tell you a secret? Of course. Sometimes I think about what it would have been like if you hadn't shown up that day. Richard stopped stirring the batter. And how do you think it would have been? Sad. I would have kept drawing you but never met you for real. And you'd still never know you had a son who loved you. The profound simplicity of the answer moved Richard. But I did show up. Yeah, and now we're happy forever. Forever, champ. Emily walked into the kitchen carrying Elizabeth, who was already awake and smiling. Good morning, family, she said cheerfully. Mommy! Ethan jumped off the chair to hug Emily and kiss his sister. Daddy's making pancakes. How delicious. Can Elizabeth have a tiny little piece? Of course, Richard said. Everyone in the Brooks family gets pancakes on Saturday mornings. They sat at the kitchen table, the same simple table where Richard had eaten his first meal in the house 4 years earlier. Elizabeth sat in her high chair, trying to grab small pieces of pancake with her tiny hands. Ethan, tell Daddy what you learned in school this week, Emily prompted. We studied different kinds of families. The teacher said family isn't just mom, dad, and kids. It can be grandparents raising grandkids, uncles raising nephews, adoptive parents. And what did you think about that? I thought it was cool because our family is different too. You found me when I was already big, Elizabeth was born later, but we love each other the same. Richard exchanged an emotional glance with Emily. Actually, Ethan, I think our family is like all real families, Richard said. Made of love, not rules. Yeah. And you know what else I learned? What? That sometimes the best things happen when we're brave enough to ask for help. Richard paused with his fork in the air. How so? If I hadn't been brave enough to go to the restaurant to ask for food, we'd never have met. Sometimes you have to be brave to get the good stuff. Emily smiled proudly at her son. It's true. Courage to ask for help. Courage to forgive. Courage to love. And courage to change, Richard added, because I needed a lot of courage to change my life. Elizabeth slapped her little hands on the table as if agreeing, and everyone laughed. After breakfast, they went to the park as they always did on Saturdays. Richard pushed Elizabeth on the swing while Emily and Ethan played soccer on the grass. "Hiya, Daddy," Elizabeth shouted, giggling. "Not too high, or Mommy will get mad," Richard teased. "I heard that," Emily called from a distance, intercepting the ball Ethan had kicked. The afternoon was perfect. Gentle sun, children playing, families enjoying themselves. Richard looked around and saw other families like his, parents playing with kids, couples chatting while their children ran around, grandparents pushing grandchildren on swings. It was an ordinary everyday scene. But to Richard, who had spent so many years focused only on work, it was extraordinary. "What are you thinking about?" Emily asked, sitting beside him on the bench while Ethan played with Elizabeth in the sand. "I'm thinking about how good it feels to be ordinary." "How so?" "Look around. We're an ordinary family, in an ordinary park, on an ordinary Saturday, and it's perfect." Emily followed her husband's gaze. "Do you miss your old life?" Richard thought for a moment. "Sometimes I miss the ease that money brought, but I never miss the loneliness." "You felt lonely?" "Completely. I had everything I thought I wanted, but no one to truly share it with. Now I have the three of you, and that's worth more than all the deals I've ever made." Ethan ran up to them, holding a small plastic cup. "Look what I found for Elizabeth," he said, showing the toy. "That's great, sweetheart. But make sure nothing's broken," Emily said, inspecting the cup. "It's clean. Can I give it to her?" "Go ahead." Ethan ran back to play with his little sister. Richard watched the scene, the 11-year-old boy patiently playing with the 1-year-old baby, explaining how to use the cup to build sandcastles. "He's going to be an amazing man," Richard said. "He already is," Emily replied. "He learns from his father." "He learns from both of you. You're the one who taught him to be kind, generous, and brave. And you're the one teaching him to be present, responsible, and loving." They silently watched the children for a few minutes. "Emily, can I ask you something I've always wanted to ask?" "Of course." "That first day when Ethan came home saying he'd met me, what was your first thought?" Emily thought for a moment. "My first reaction was panic. I thought, that's it. Now he's going to take Ethan away from me. My second thought was anger. I thought, how dare he show up now after all this time? And the third? The third was hope. A hope I'd been trying to suppress for 8 years. The hope that maybe, just maybe, you had changed. That maybe Ethan could have the father he always dreamed of. And when did you know I'd truly changed?" It wasn't one specific moment. It was a process. Every day you showed up. Every time you put Ethan before work. Every time you proved you were learning to be a father. Little by little, I started believing the change was real. Richard nodded. For me, the turning point was when Ethan showed me his drawings, seeing that he'd spent years imagining a father, dreaming of a family. That's when I realized how much I'd lost, and how much I could still gain. "And you don't regret anything about the life you left behind?" Richard looked around at the simple park, the children playing, his wife beside him. "How could I regret trading an empty life for one full of love?" The sun began to set, and they gathered the kids to head home. On the way, Elizabeth fell asleep in the car, while Ethan excitedly talked about his plans for the treehouse. "Daddy, when I grow up, I'm going to build a treehouse for my kids too." That's a great idea. And I'll teach them how to play soccer, make pancakes and draw. Just like I taught you? Just like you taught me. And if they ask about Grandpa, I'll tell them our whole story. Richard's heart warmed at the thought of being a grandfather one day. What story will you tell? I'll tell them Grandpa was a very rich man, but very lonely. And one day, a very brave boy asked him for food, and then they found out they were father and son. And that Grandpa learned family is more important than money. Ethan's simplified version of their family story made them smile. It's a good story, Richard said. It's the best story in the world, Ethan replied with conviction. When they got home, Richard put Elizabeth to bed while Emily helped Ethan with his bath. It was a simple, repetitive routine, but one Richard had learned to cherish. Every night, as he tucked the kids in, he thought about how his life had completely transformed. 4 years ago, his evenings were spent at business dinners or alone in his silent apartment. Now, they were filled with bedtime stories, chats about school and lullabies. "Daddy, can you tell me a story?" Ethan asked, already in bed. "Of course, what kind of story do you want?" "Tell the story about the boy who found his father in a restaurant." Richard smiled. Ethan loved hearing different versions of his own story. Once upon a time, there was a very brave boy who lived with his mother in a simple little house. As he told the story, watching Ethan's eyes slowly close, Richard thought about what a privilege it was to do this. How many fathers missed these moments because they were too busy with other things? When Ethan fell asleep, Richard went to check on Elizabeth, who was sleeping peacefully in her crib. Then he joined Emily in the living room. "Did the kids sleep well?" she asked. Ethan asked for the usual story, and Elizabeth didn't even wake up when I put her in the crib. "They're growing up so fast." "It's true. Sometimes I'm afraid I'm missing important moments." Emily looked at her husband in surprise. "Why would you be afraid of that? You're present for every moment." "But what if I'm not paying enough attention? What if I'm too busy with work? What if—" Emily interrupted Richard's worries with a gentle kiss. "Richard, you're the most present father I know. Ethan and Elizabeth are the priority in your life, and that's obvious to anyone who watches us." "How can you be so sure?" "Because Ethan talks about you all the time. At school, with the neighbors, with me. To him, you're the hero of his story." Richard felt his eyes fill with tears. "He's the real hero. If it weren't for his courage, you're both heroes, each in your own way." That night, Richard had a vivid dream. He dreamed he was back in the restaurant, but this time the whole family was together. Ethan was no longer a child asking for leftovers, but a grown man, introducing his own children to their grandfather. In the dream, Richard saw himself telling his grandchildren about the day everything changed, when a brave little boy walked up and called a stranger, "Daddy." He woke with a heart full of gratitude and hope for the future. The end of the story. Now tell me what you thought of this touching story. Do you think Richard made the right decisions? How would you react if you were in Emily's place? Leave a comment sharing your honest opinion and where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.